There is a woman who moves like dusk across the horizon, present, but never captured. She does not belong to any man, not because she is cold or unfeeling, but because she belongs first to herself. Men orbit her like moths around a quiet flame, drawn by a force they cannot name, yet unable to resist. It is not her beauty that makes her magnetic, though beauty may veil her. It is not her laughter, her body, or the tilt of her gaze. What ensnares them is the refusal, the subtle but unshakable signal that she is not theirs to possess. Her presence whispers freedom, and in that freedom lies the paradox of desire. The more she slips through their grasp, the deeper they chase. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in this alchemy, the transformation belongs more to him than to her. For when a man collides with a woman who refuses to belong, he collides with his own shadow, the hidden, hungry part of himself that has been denied, repressed, or ignored. To his conscious mind, she is a puzzle. Why does her distance ignite a fire when another woman's devotion extinguishes it? Why does her refusal breed obsession while another's surrender breeds indifference? Yet beneath these questions lies something older, the primal ache of the anima, the archetypal feminine within him, awakened by a living mirror he cannot control. This is why he chases her, not because she withholds, but because her very being forces him to face what he has buried. Her independence punctures his illusion of dominance. Her detachment confronts his ego's claim of ownership. And her refusal to be possessed cracks open a wound that has followed him since childhood, the wound of never fully holding the mother, the wound of longing for what slips away, the wound of desire that can never be tamed. But you, listening now, must understand, this is not about playing a game. This is not about manipulation, nor the shallow power of withholding. It is about the eternal truth of polarity, that what cannot be consumed, what cannot be owned, awakens reverence. And in reverence, his pursuit begins. The male ego, by its nature, clings to possession. It thrives on conquest, on the idea that once something, or someone, is claimed, it is secured forever. To own is to affirm identity. To dominate is to prove worth. But when he meets the woman who refuses to belong, the structure of his ego begins to tremble. Her essence cannot be chained. She is present with him but never collapses into him. She listens, she laughs, she touches his hand, but there is always a silence beneath her gestures, a silence that belongs only to her. In that silence, he feels both hunger and terror. For the first time, he realizes that intimacy can unfold without ownership, and that realization dismantles the illusion he has built around love. Jung described the ego as a fragile mask, a temporary shell that hides the vast ocean of the unconscious. When she denies belonging, when she refuses to dissolve into his demands, she forces him into the waters of that unconscious. He sees, perhaps for the first time, that his desire for possession is not love but fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of insignificance. Fear of being unseen. This is why her independence unsettles him so profoundly. She does not soothe his fears with compliance. She does not drown herself in his world to confirm his importance. Instead, she embodies individuation, the Jungian path of becoming whole in oneself. And in her wholeness, he encounters the truth that terrifies him. Love cannot be owned. It can only be met, moment by moment, as two sovereign beings choosing one another freely. Yet paradoxically, this truth makes him chase harder. Because the ego, when threatened, clings more desperately. The more he feels her slipping beyond his grasp, the more his shadow surges with craving. He wants not just her presence but the certainty of control. And so, he runs after her, believing that her refusal is a barrier to overcome, when in reality, it is the very source of his desire. She knows this. Not consciously, not as a strategy, but as a rhythm embedded in her being. The rhythm of the feminine that refuses reduction, the rhythm of the soul that will not be swallowed. She is the mirror he cannot shatter, the silence he cannot fill, the freedom he cannot tame. And in this paradox, obsession is born. The woman who refuses to belong is not mysterious because she tries to be. Mystery radiates from her because she lives in alignment with herself, not with the scripts that men write for her. She does not rush to explain her silences, nor does she dress her choices in apologies. And so, he projects onto her the most primal theater of the unconscious. Carl Jung wrote that what we deny within ourselves, we see in others. Projection is the shadow's language. The man, unable to embrace his own vulnerability, his own longing for nurturance, casts these needs onto her. She becomes, in his eyes, both goddess and temptress, healer and destroyer. He does not see her, he sees the fragments of himself he cannot hold. This is why her refusal unsettles him so deeply. If she belonged to him, his projections would feel safe. She would carry the burden of his unlived self, soothing the wound of incompleteness. But she does not. She slips through the fingers of his certainty, reminding him that no woman can complete a man's soul. Completion is his own journey, his own descent into shadow. Her detachment forces him to stand before the mirror of his own emptiness. He is enraged, then enthralled, then enslaved by the cycle of wanting. Each time she smiles and then retreats, each time she is near and then distant, he feels the abyss of his inner life opening wider. And instead of facing it, he chases harder, desperate to make her embody what he cannot claim within himself. The irony is sharp. The more he seeks to possess her, the further he drifts from himself. And she, unaware of the archetypal storm she stirs, becomes the axis of his obsession. She is not cruel, nor manipulative, she simply exists as her own sovereign being. Yet in doing so, she awakens the masculine shadow, the fear of insignificance, the terror of abandonment, the ancient hunger for the mother who could never be owned. In his pursuit, he is not chasing her body, nor her love, nor her companionship. He is chasing the wholeness he has not yet found. She becomes his mirror and his wound, his hunger and his teacher. And in that chase, he is undone. A woman who refuses to belong does not stand outside of love, she simply stands outside of ownership. And in that stance, she becomes the archetype of the anima, the inner feminine that lives inside every man. Carl Jung taught that the anima is not merely a romantic fantasy, but the gateway to a man's soul. She is the voice that calls him inward, toward depth, toward the unconscious. Yet when a man has not integrated this part of himself, he projects her onto flesh and bone. Suddenly, the woman before him becomes more than herself. She becomes the living symbol of everything he seeks to awaken. But here lies the paradox. To embrace the anima means surrendering control. It means listening, softening, dissolving the rigid boundaries of ego. And the man who has built his identity on mastery, power, and possession fears this surrender more than anything. So when he meets the woman who will not belong, he feels torn in two directions. One part of him longs to merge with her, to worship her, to fall into the ocean of her being. The other part clings desperately to control, to structure, to the illusion of dominance. This inner conflict fuels his obsession. He cannot let her go, yet he cannot hold her without shattering himself. Her sovereignty, her refusal, exposes his deepest insecurity, that love cannot be owned, that intimacy is not control, that the feminine is not a prize but a force. She awakens in him the truth he resists, that the soul's union is not achieved through conquest, but through surrender. And so, he chases. Not because she belongs to him, but because she never will. Her freedom is the flame, his unintegrated anima is the moth. He circles closer and closer, even as the heat consumes him. The chase itself is not merely about her, it is about what she symbolizes. She is the mirror he cannot break, the reflection of a truth he has long buried. In his pursuit, he is not hunting flesh but the fragments of his own lost wholeness. For centuries, men have sought to claim the feminine as property. Wives bound to names, bodies bound to lineage, voices bound to silence. Yet, beneath the surface of these structures, an older memory stirs. The anima whispers, love cannot be owned. Soul cannot be chained. The feminine is not a pasture to be fenced, but a wilderness that remakes those who enter it. The man who encounters the woman who refuses to belong stands at a crossroads. To continue the chase is to remain in the grip of his projections, forever yearning, forever restless, forever outside the gates of his own heart. But to stop, to truly see her, not as a possession, but as a force, requires the courage of initiation. This initiation is brutal, for it demands he let die the part of him that believes control is love. It demands that he confront the shadow he has long exiled, the fear of abandonment, the terror of insignificance, the ache of unworthiness. In her refusal, he meets the wound of his boyhood, the moment he first believed love was something he must earn, capture, or keep. Her sovereignty pulls him into a fire that will either destroy or transform. To stand in her presence without ownership is to taste freedom, but also to lose the false security of dominance. The man who survives this fire emerges altered, not because he wins her, but because he finally meets himself. For it is not the belonging of the woman that heals him. It is the recognition that love exists outside possession, that desire is not a chain but a current, that freedom itself can be the most intimate bond. She is not merely a woman, she is the archetype of the wild feminine. Untamed, unclaimed, unwilling to bend her spine beneath the weight of expectation. She does not flatter his ego nor soothe his insecurities. Instead, she walks like fire through his illusions, igniting both awe and fear. Men call her dangerous because she cannot be controlled. They name her selfish because she refuses to trade her freedom for approval. They call her elusive, fickle, even cruel, yet it is not cruelty that drives her, but clarity. She knows that love bound by ownership ceases to be love. It becomes imprisonment. In Jungian language, she embodies the anima in its rawest form, the guide who draws the masculine into his unconscious, beckoning him to explore the depths he has long avoided. But the anima does not come softly when resisted. She appears as obsession, as longing that burns and consumes. She becomes the voice in his dreams, the ache in his chest, the reminder that there exists a life beyond the cage of his ego. To chase her is to chase the wilderness within himself. Every step he takes toward her is a step toward the buried forest of his psyche, the primal emotions, the wounds of childhood, the shadows of rejection and desire. She forces him to confront what he has hidden, the hunger for meaning, the thirst for intimacy unbound by domination. Her refusal to belong is not defiance for its own sake. It is medicine. It is the dark gift that dismantles his illusion of power. She invites him to love without chains, to desire without consuming, to surrender without annihilation. But not every man is ready for this medicine. Some, faced with her refusal, turn bitter, resenting what they cannot claim. Others try harder, chasing until exhaustion blinds them. Only a few have the courage to pause, to sit in the silence of her absence, and to ask the deeper question: what part of me is she refusing to belong to? The answer to that question is the threshold of transformation. It is the place where the boy obsessed with possession can die, and the man capable of reverence can be born. The refusal is not only his crucible, it is her awakening. In the space where she withholds her belonging, she discovers a truth that women across centuries have buried beneath duty, fear, and longing. Detachment is not the absence of love, but the presence of self. She learns that to say no is to declare herself sovereign. That silence is not weakness, but a mirror that forces him to listen to his own echo. In her detachment, she does not chase, she does not cling, she does not shrink into the anxious rhythm of waiting for his validation. Instead, she stands rooted, her presence unshaken, her absence just as powerful as her embrace. And he feels it. The paradox of her withdrawal awakens his hunger more than any devotion could. The man, ruled by ego, cannot fathom that a woman would rather dwell in her solitude than kneel at the altar of his attention. To him, her distance is not neutrality, it is a wound. For every part of him that longs to be admired, needed, claimed, begins to ache when she shows him she can exist beyond his grasp. In Jungian psychology, this is projection unraveling. He has cast his anima, his ideal, upon her, expecting her to fulfill his emptiness, to embody his dream. But she steps aside, and the illusion collapses. The mask falls. He is left not with her body, but with his own shadow, the abandoned child who once feared rejection, the boy who needed to be chosen to feel alive. This is why men chase the women who refuse to belong. Because in her refusal, she forces him to chase not her, but the forgotten fragments of himself. She becomes the mirror that will not yield, the flame that will not bow, the goddess who will not descend to meet him in the smallness of ego. Yet her power does not come from manipulation, it comes from purity. She does not perform distance to control him, she lives it because she no longer fears being alone. And that, more than beauty, more than charm, is what keeps him haunted by her presence. Her detachment is the mystery that bends him to his knees. It is the feminine alchemy that turns absence into obsession, silence into desire, refusal into revelation. The battlefield is not of flesh, nor of words, but of psyche. It is fought in the silent pauses between messages left unanswered, in the absence of her footsteps where he once expected her presence, in the empty chair across from him at the table. These voids speak louder than any confrontation ever could. They whisper to him of her power and of his hunger. Each time she refuses to belong, he feels both diminished and awakened. Diminished, because the empire of his ego cannot claim victory over her. Awakened, because her detachment lures him into the territory of his own wounds, the places where his need for possession was born. In her distance, he faces himself. But this battle is not cruelty. It is initiation. She is not withholding as punishment, but as revelation. By refusing to dissolve into his orbit, she teaches him the law of polarity. True connection cannot be built on control, but on the respect of separateness. Her strength reveals his fragility. Her silence exposes his noise. Her refusal becomes the catalyst for his transformation. And yet, the paradox remains. He is drawn closer to her with every step she takes into her own sovereignty. The more she embodies her independence, the more his body aches for her presence. The more she chooses herself, the more he feels compelled to chase her shadow. Not because she denies him affection, but because she lives beyond the cage of his expectations. This is the sacred tension, the dance of the unattainable. Not the cruel withholding of love, but the radiant refusal to betray the self for belonging. She embodies the truth that love is not slavery, and intimacy is not ownership. In this battlefield, she does not seek to win him. She seeks to remain whole. And when a woman remains whole, when she resists the gravity of his need to possess, she becomes both his torment and his teacher. He chases not merely her body, nor her laughter, but the rare and terrible freedom she carries within her. For in that freedom lies a force he cannot conquer, only revere. When she no longer bends to his will, he is forced to meet the one opponent he has spent his life avoiding, his own shadow. Every attempt to possess her is met with her silence, her poise, her refusal to collapse. And in that mirror he sees the fractures in his masculinity, the boyhood wounds, the unhealed hunger for validation, the terror of being unchosen. Her detachment awakens the archetype of the anima within him, the feminine soul image he projected outward, now slipping from his grasp. He realizes that what he chased was never her alone, but the reflection of his inner longing. She has become the vessel of his transformation, the flame that draws him toward individuation, even as it burns his pride. The more he chases, the more he feels her distance transform into a riddle. She is near enough to feel real, yet vast enough to remind him she belongs first to herself. And in that paradox, he begins to unravel. Desire deepens into obsession, obsession becomes confrontation, and confrontation leads him back to himself. It is not her he must conquer, but the illusions that have bound him, the fantasy of ownership, the fear of abandonment, the fragile scaffolding of an ego that cannot bear to be refused. Her refusal breaks him open, and in that breaking, the seed of rebirth is planted. In the stillness of her refusal, he begins to see that she is no longer just a woman. She is an archetype, a threshold, a living myth. She becomes the embodiment of the eternal feminine, not a possession to be held but a mystery to be revered. Her freedom carves a wound into him, yet within that wound lies the only path toward wholeness. The chase transforms. It is no longer about claiming her, but about reclaiming himself. The hunger shifts from wanting her presence to desiring the essence she awakens in him, the courage to face solitude, the humility to dismantle his illusions, the strength to stand before her without chains. She is the mirror that forces him to bow, not in defeat but in surrender to something greater than desire, the awareness that true love is never about ownership. It is about standing near the flame without demanding it be extinguished. Her refusal becomes a sacred teacher. Every distance she holds reminds him of the necessity of space. Every silence she offers reveals the poverty of his words. And in the ache of wanting what he cannot command, he discovers the one truth he has always avoided. A woman who belongs to herself cannot be taken, only met. It is there, in that meeting, not of conquest, but of presence, that his obsession begins to dissolve into reverence. In the twilight of his pursuit, when exhaustion silences his restless hunger, a different kind of clarity emerges. He sees her not as a prize, nor as a mystery to be solved, but as a force that has carved new dimensions within him. The very act of chasing her has undone the boy and awakened the man. For in her refusal, she gave him the rarest gift, the invitation to confront the void he has always feared. The void of his own emptiness. The void of his illusions. The void where all masks are stripped away, and only truth remains. She stands, untouched, her sovereignty radiant, her silence more eloquent than 1,000 words. She has not bent, she has not yielded, she has not bartered her essence for his comfort. She has shown him that love cannot be traded for safety, nor chained by fear. And so he kneels, not to possess, but to witness. Not in weakness, but in reverence. For in losing the illusion of owning her, he has discovered the possibility of meeting her. Not as a shadow of himself, but as an equal, standing naked before the eternal fire of the feminine. She remains free. He remains changed. The chase has ended, yet the lesson endures. A woman who refuses to belong to him becomes the mirror that forces him to belong to himself. And now, as you sit with these words, ask yourself, where in your life have you bartered your freedom for acceptance? Where have you mistaken belonging for chains, and silence for surrender? If this message stirred something deep within you, let it not fade into the noise of another day. Carry it, shape it, live it. Subscribe, not merely to a channel, but to a journey of awakening. Share these truths with the women who walk beside you, the sisters who have forgotten their fire, the daughters who deserve to know their worth. And when you click below, remember, you are not just engaging with content. You are stepping into a circle of remembrance, where the forgotten power of the feminine is spoken into being again and again. The chase ends here. The awakening begins with you.